In this video, I'm going to take a look at the new Pentax-FA 50mm f1.4 classic lens, launched this year. The lens is a retuning of the FA50 f1.4, first produced in 1991, and it has some very interesting characteristics. First of all, the lens has a wonderful optical heritage, with the same 7 elements optical design as the M42 mount Takumars, lenses that have a lot of fans who enjoy their beautiful bokeh and stop-down rendering. The Classic's coatings have been updated from the original FA, and its design has been fine-tuned to produce one particularly fascinating feature that neither the original FA nor the Takumars can produce, and that's rainbow flares. I'll be showing you videos and images of these flares, and asking whether they're interesting and unique enough to make this lens a serious contender for your money. When the original FA was introduced, it was rated as one of the best value fast 50s you could buy. The good reviews encouraged me to buy the original lens, essentially as a portrait lens with autofocus and a lens for low light situations. I wasn't so interested in wide open bokeh in those days. 20 odd years later, I wonder whether the newly made Classic is still a good value lens. It's certainly a lot less expensive and a lot smaller than many modern fast 50 primes you can buy. But how does it perform on today's digital sensors? As well as reviewing the Classic's performance, I'll be including some side-by-side comparison images with a Super-Multi-Coated Takumar 50 f1.4 from 1971. It's a really good lens, but the downside is it has radioactive glass, and this is a big no-no for some people. The Classic doesn't have radioactive glass, so how does it compare? I'll start with the specs and user experience. Here's the lens in its box. It comes with an ND filter, which I'll talk about later. Ricoh kindly sent me a copy of the lens to try, having seen my videos on Takumar and Pentax lenses, but this is an independent review. I'm not being paid by Ricoh to produce this video. I should also add that this FA Classic isn't the only new version of the FA50 f1.4. There's also an HD version with the most up-to-date coatings, but with fewer of the amazing flare effects I'll be showing you. The Classic is a K-mount lens with 7 elements in 6 groups, 8 aperture blades, and a minimum focusing distance of 0.45 meters. I think it's fair to say that the f1.4's optical designs are legendary. It all began with the 8-element Super Takumar and quickly progressed to 7-element versions. This 7 elements design was retained through Pentax's change of mount to the K-mount and the introduction of the F and the FA autofocus lenses. While Pentax kept the core optical formula, they experimented with radioactive glass, introduced multi-coatings, and then updated the lens's physical design and electronics. In terms of its body design, well, you're buying this lens for its optical performance, and not really its looks. It's a solidly built lens and certainly has a distinctive style, a dark grey retro style, with very clean lines that hark back to the 1990s, rather than the earlier black hills and valleys, sculptured metal focus and aperture rings. The focusing ring at the front is rather small, but it is well positioned. The ring is quite tactile to use in practice. The lens doesn't come with a hood, but it really benefits from one if you're looking for the best performance, unless of course you deliberately want it to flare. I've used the lens on both full frame and cropped sensors on Pentax and Sony cameras. When I first owned the original FA version back in the 90s, I only had a 1.5x crop camera, and I liked the portrait style framing it gave me, equivalent to around 75mm, and I still use crop framing sometimes on my full frame cameras. If you're not using a Pentax K-mount camera and need an adapter, get one that can move the aperture lever at the back of the lens to stop down the lens. It opens up opportunities to use all kinds of excellent film era and digital era Pentax lenses, including lenses without aperture rings on the body. Now onto the lens's performance, starting with its performance wide open at f1.4. Bokeh is such a subjective thing, so I can only really speak for myself, but I do like the wide open bokeh produced by this lens. It has a lovely creamy softness. The autofocus highlights are smooth and attractive, with gorgeous bubbles and a hint of swirl on occasions. The subject isolation you can achieve with the lens is what you'd expect from a 1.4 fast 50. In other words, it's excellent. You have to be a bit careful about busy light and dark backgrounds, as the lens's coatings aren't as good as modern digital lenses, and it does have a tendency to blow the light parts in very bright light, but this is something you have to watch out for with many other lenses. Having said that, I do like the classic's busy bokeh rendering with the right compositions. It has a very beautiful and eye-catching look. The lens can be a little soft wide open on in-focus objects, but sometimes that reflects the difficulty of nailing the focus in such a narrow depth of field. The question is it too soft wide open in today's digital world? Looking through all my wide open shots, I don't think it is too soft. If I zoom into straight out of camera images, the details are okay, and there's enough there to sharpen up in post-processing if you want to do that. This slight softness can also work well for portraits, for example, where it adds to the overall attractions and character of a dreamier wide-open shot. There are compositions where it would be nice to have a razor-sharp image of the in-focus object. However, razor sharpness is not something many f1.4 or faster lenses can deliver wide open, and if you stop down the lens, it sharpens up very nicely. The good news is if you do stop down a little, you're not going to lose the look of the out-of-focus rendering. It's still going to be soft and smooth. And the design of the blades mean that those bokeh balls or bubbles are going to retain their round shape rather than turn quickly into geometric shapes. This is a distinct advantage over the old Takumar's rendering, as we'll see later. The classic is prone to purple fringing wide open in very bright light. You can see this in a variety of situations. The fringing goes away when you stop down, and generally it's the kind of fringing that you can deal with in post-processing if you've got the right software. The ghosting around lettering or objects wide open is less easy to deal with. You just have to accept this is part of the charm and the glow of soft rendering. Indeed, this glow can give wide open images a rather beautiful look in the right light and with the right composition. Now let's get on to the lens's ability to produce rainbow flares, because this is one of its amazing qualities. I'll start with a short video taken with the Super-Multi-Coated Takumar wide open, just to provide a reference point. This is a torch behind some marbles on a black countertop. The Takumar, as you can see, produces some pretty conventional Fast 50 style flares, big circles with some intricate geometric shapes. And now let's see the FA Classic in action. It's an amazingly colourful look. I don't own any other lenses that produce such vivid rainbow flares. Yes, there are lenses that produce quite wild multicoloured effects, but not with such clean results, almost on demand. All the rainbow flares you're going to see were produced with the lens wide open. If I start a video stop down, you can see what happens as I open up the aperture blades. The lens only produces these rainbow flares at f1.4. Outdoors, here's an example of the lens flares from wide open to stop down. Stop down, the lens produces more conventional flares. The flares are bold, but nothing like the rainbow flares. And another wide open versus stop down comparison. I find the Classic's rainbow flares very colourful and attractive. You can have a lot of fun creating artistic images with this lens, experimenting with the position and shape of the flares to produce different styles of composition. Here the lens has produced rainbow flares and other fascinating geometric shapes, as well as soap bubble bokeh on the right-hand side. It's an interesting challenge to get in-focus subjects inside the main circle of the flare, as I've done in these shots. And you can also produce more subtle images where the rainbow flares are there, but they don't stand out so starkly, as they're more blended into the background. It's a good idea they included a neutral density filter with the lens. ND filters require slower exposure times, helping you produce smooth-looking running water in waterfalls, for example. But with this lens, the filter is good for handling very bright sunlight, and this helps to accentuate the flares. In this photo of the Houses of Parliament, the camera is pointed directly into the sun without any filters. At ISO 100 and the camera set to 1/8000th of a second, Even at this very fast shutter speed, the image is still blown out by the sun. A critical warning to make at this juncture is that you really mustn't look at the sun directly, especially through an optical viewfinder, such as the K1's optical viewfinder. Instead, you should use the digital screen on the back of the camera to frame the composition and let the screen filter the sun. This is how the ND filter helps with very bright, direct sunlight. The exposures become much more controllable. This is straight out of camera and it's taken at 1/5000th of a second. And another example without and with the ND filter. The filter is not essential in all situations, but it really does help with very, very bright light sources. Before I used the lens, I thought I might get easily bored with these effects, but no, on the contrary, I find them endlessly fascinating, and some of the results are very beautiful. And you don't need to do a lot of post-processing to showcase these effects. These images are straight out of camera, and typically with many other lenses, you'd need to do a lot of processing to extract this clarity of flare in extreme lighting conditions. Finally, another straight out of camera shot using the ND filter. Now, all the flare videos and photos to date were taken on full-frame cameras. In their blurb for the lens, Ricoh said that it may be difficult to create rainbow flare when the lens is mounted on an APS-C format camera. I tried the lens on a crop sensor, and it's certainly not as easy to create the full rainbow flare effects, as the sensor tends to crop off a portion of the circular flares. However, APS-C cameras produce some pretty startling results, including full circles if you get the angles right, so the lens is still well worth playing around with on crop. Now let's turn to the Classic's performance stop-down without flares. The lens performs very well in terms of sharpness, rendering and colours. As I've already mentioned, you only need to stop down the lens a little to get sharp in-focus shots. As well as portraiture, which I'll cover later, the Classic is an excellent walk-around lens, if you're okay with the 55mm focal length. Its faster speed is good for indoor shots with less light, visiting museums for example. To show you how the lens performs, I went for a walk around the River Thames at Westminster in central London, and then visited the Victoria and Albert Museum. Here are some of the results with the lens stopped down. This is the National COVID Memorial Wall, and zooming in, the lens's rendering is easily detailed enough to read the messages. And here are some shots from inside the V&A Museum. Suffice it to say that it really helps to have a fast lens in some dimly lit rooms, but you can still stop down a little and get some extra sharpness. And back outside, stop right down, you can produce some nice starbursts for colour and black and white images. Last but not least, the Classic is an excellent portrait lens on full frame, and perhaps even more so on a crop sensor, where you have an approximately 75mm style crop. Wide open, you get an attractive soft look to your subjects and a lovely creamy background, if you have the right backgrounds of course. Stop down and you'll produce a very sharp portrait, as you can see here when I zoom in. It's one of those perhaps a little too sharp lenses for intimate shots. As promised, I've also done some side-by-side comparisons of the FA Classic with a radioactive Super-Multi-Coated Takumar 50 f1.4, beginning with some wide-open shots taken with the same camera each time. The two lenses really do produce very similar bokeh and out-of-focus rendering, but you can judge whether you can see any specific differences from these pairs. I spent quite a lot of time trying to work out which lens is sharper wide open, because the original FA, I felt that the Takumar was a little sharper. I haven't changed my mind with the FA Classic. I find the Takumar seems to produce a little less purple fringing wide open, and the ghosting around lettering close up is a little less obvious. However, the sharpness differences are not significant, unless you're into serious pixel peeping. What is significant is the rainbow flaring, as we've already seen. The FA Classic produces beautiful flares wide open, whereas the Takumar doesn't produce these kinds of flares. Another noticeable difference is the effect of the FA Classics blades when you stop down. The design of the FA Classics blades is much better for partially stopped down images. The geometric shapes produced with the Takumar are apparent almost as soon as you start to close the blades, while the Classic retains nice round shapes until later. Something that's obvious when you look at the blades themselves. Stopped down to around f8 and used as walk-around or landscape lenses, there's a further noticeable difference between the two lenses because the Takumar produces a colour tint to white blocks in images. I think this is caused by the Takumar's old radioactive glass. Even though I've cured the glass of its brownish tint, there must be a little coloration left that you can't see with the naked eye. And indeed, when you look at wide-open images as well as stop-down images, the Takumar's tint is also apparent in some situations. I know some people like these kinds of vintage-looking tints, especially the golden tints from radioactive glass. It's something you can try to recreate in post-processing. And indeed, this is something that Ricoh have thought of, as they've issued a new software update for Pentax K1 camera owners, specifically for their new FA 51.4 lenses. Their version 2.30 update adds a gold custom image mode for the K1, giving you a lovely gold tint to images, not dissimilar to the kind of tint you'll see from radioactive lenses where you haven't cured the golden tint using UV light. Here's the result of using the gold image mode on my K1. Good on Ricoh for doing this for Pentax K1 owners. In conclusion, the FA Classic has a wonderful optical heritage and it shows. It produces beautiful, soft, painterly bokeh wide open. It's very sharp and colourful stop down, and it's an excellent portrait lens. It doesn't have the most up-to-date anti-flare coatings. If you're looking for that, then it's best to try the alternative, the new HD coated version of the lens. I have to end with the Classic's rainbow flares because I think they're truly amazing. When I first read the marketing material for the lens, I wasn't sure whether these kind of flares would be any more than a passing fancy. But I've actually really enjoyed playing with rainbow flares for this review, both outdoors and indoors. The flares have a lot of unique character and a lot of creative potential. I plan to capture many more rainbows in the future. And I'd like to commend Ricoh for reintroducing the lens. It's different enough to be interesting to people like me who already own a number of primes, and it should also appeal to people starting out in digital or even film photography who want to add a new, good value fast 50 alongside their zooms. If you don't have a Pentax camera, then no worries. It's easy to adapt K-mount lenses to digital cameras these days. You will miss some of the automated functions such as autofocus, setting f-stops in camera, and the new gold color mode. But getting a K-mount adapter, especially one with an aperture control ring, will open up a whole new adventure in excellent old and new Pentax lenses. Thanks for watching. I look forward to reading your comments on this review and any experiences you have with this lens or the original FA. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so, and until the next time, all the best.